All right, let's talk about something we've all felt. You get a test back, you see that number at the top, and your stomach just drops. Or maybe you feel a rush of relief. But have you ever really stopped to think about how they decide what's passing and what's failing? Today, we're going to pull back that curtain. Okay, so let's say you get a test back. It's a 78%. What does that even mean? Is that good? Did you pass? Honestly, who knows? By itself, that number is kind of empty. It doesn't mean a thing, at least not yet. And that's the whole point, right? Without a real system behind it, that 78 is just a number floating in space. It doesn't tell anyone, not your teacher, not a future boss, not even you, what you're truly capable of. It's just a number. So, how do we give these numbers some actual weight? How do we make them mean something? Well, believe it or not, there's a whole process for this, a real science, and we're about to jump right in. It's a field called standard setting, and it's exactly what it sounds like, a systematic way to establish those score thresholds, what experts call cut scores. You know, the line that separates a pass from a fail, or what makes someone proficient versus just basic. And this is a really big deal. Why? Well, for one, it's about fairness. It means you're being judged against a clear, thought-out set of criteria, not just some random opinion. It's also about validity, making sure the score actually reflects what you can do. And that leads to accountability, because schools or companies can actually defend their decisions. And finally, it's about transparency, so everyone involved knows what the scores really represent. Okay, so to really get how these standards are set, you first have to understand that there are two totally different ways to think about scores. It really boils down to one question. Are we comparing you to everyone else who took the test, or are we comparing you to a fixed set of skills? On one hand, you've got what's called norm referenced. Just think grading on a curve. Your score is all about where you land compared to the group. You know, the top 10% get an A. It's a ranking system. But on the other hand, you have criterion referenced. This one doesn't care about anyone else. It compares you to a set standard, a criterion. It's not about being first or last. It's just, can you do the thing? Like, can you write a coherent paragraph? Yes or no? And the second idea, that's the bedrock for almost all serious standard setting today. Okay, so if the goal is to measure you against a fixed standard, that begs a question, how in the world is that standard, that passing score, born? Let's pull back the curtain and look at the actual mechanics. I mean, this is the big one, right? How do the experts actually decide where to draw that line? It can't just be some number they pull out of a hat. There's got to be a logical, defensible process for this. And you'd be right, there totally is. It is definitely not about someone's gut feeling or a number that just feels right. No way. It's a very systematic procedure that involves a panel of expert judges. So let's actually look at one of the most common methods to see how this works in practice. So one of the classic ways to do this is called the Angoff method. And what it does is pretty clever. It takes this huge, daunting decision and breaks it down into tiny, manageable pieces. First, you get a room full of experts. Think experienced teachers, people who really know the subject. Then they go through the test, one question at a time. And for each question, they ask a very specific thing. What is the probability that a minimally competent person, someone who just barely squeaks by to pass, would get this specific question right? They assign a probability to every single question, and then you just average all those probabilities together. That average becomes the cut score. It's a really smart way to build a solid consensus and make sure one person's weird bias doesn't decide everything. Now, you can probably see that this whole thing leans heavily on the judgment of those experts, which is great, but it also means the human element is front and center. And whenever humans are involved, well, things can get a little messy. There are some real pitfalls to watch out for. So who are these expert judges anyway? We're talking about seasoned pros here, veteran teachers, the folks who actually develop the tests, specialists in the field. But here's the catch. Just being smart isn't enough. For this to work, they have to be properly trained. They have to know the test inside and out, and they have to be consistent and unbiased. That's a tall order. Because look, you can have the smartest people in the world in that room, but if the process isn't handled carefully, the whole thing can fall apart. Let's talk about some of the most common ways this can go sideways. Okay, problem number one is probably the most common one, just making up a number. When someone just declares, passing is 70%, if there's no evidence, no procedure, no anything to back that number up, that's what we call an arbitrary cut score. And it's basically indefensible. Another big one is not training the judges properly. Think back to that Angoff method.
If every expert in the room has a wildly different idea of what a minimally competent person even looks like, well, their estimates are going to be all over the place. The final score won't be reliable at all.
And a third major pitfall is just ignoring the consequences. I mean, these aren't just numbers on a page. They're used for huge, life-changing decisions. Getting a professional license, graduating from school, landing a job. You have to think about the real-world impact of where you draw that line.
All right, we've been deep in the weeds of theory and process, so let's pull back up and talk about the big picture. Why does any of this actually matter to you? So here's the takeaway. The next time you're faced with a big test, you're now armed with the right questions to ask. Is the passing score defensible? Is there a real documented process behind it? Is it consistent, or does it change every year? Is the whole thing transparent? And maybe the most important question, is it even appropriate for what the test is supposed to be measuring? A truly good standard has to tick all of those boxes. At the end of the day, it really does all boil down to this simple idea. Standard setting is what gives a test score its meaning. It's what makes it a fair and valid tool for making decisions. Without that careful, thoughtful process, scores are just noise. But with it, they become something powerful, a key that can unlock a door, a stamp of approval that we can actually trust.
So I'll leave you with this one last thought. The next time you see a passing score, on a test, for a job, for anything, I hope you'll pause for a second. I hope you'll wonder, I wonder how they came up with that number. Because now you know the right questions to ask. Thanks for tuning in.